Hello and welcome. The United States of America has elected a new president. Republican candidate Donald Trump is set to make a historic return to the White House. He defeated Democrat Kamala Harris to secure the mandate to be the 47th president of the U.S. As the results poured in, the world started weighing the impact of these consequential elections. Leaders across the globe reacted to the results, many expressing their will to work with the new U.S. president, while some indicating a cautionary stance. Leaders in Africa have also been quick to react, with many sending congratulatory messages. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa said he looks forward to continuing the close and mutually beneficial partnership with the U.S. Though South Africa-U.S. ties have thrived under a Republican rule, Pretoria's stance against Israel could become a point of contention going forward. Nigerian President Bola Tinubu said that he seeks to strengthen ties between the two countries amid complex challenges. During his first term, Donald Trump had lent military support to Nigeria to fight Boko Haram terrorists. And the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi wrote that he wishes to work with Trump to establish regional peace and security. Trump had rebooted ties with Egypt during his first term. While the Biden administration cooperated with the al-Sisi government for Gaza peace efforts, it never invited him to the White House. Unlike others, some were slower to congratulate Trump. Kenyan President William Ruto wished the American leader, as per reports, and the support that the Biden administration has given to Ruto may well not be replicated by the Trump administration. Then, in the Horn of Africa, the Ethiopian Prime Minister was among the first African leaders to congratulate Trump. The landlocked nation had won Trump's support to gain access to the coastline, a matter that has worsened its ties with its neighbor Somalia. Ethiopia wants access to Somalia's breakaway region, Somaliland's coastline. Now, interestingly, the Somalian president, Hassan Sheikh, has also expressed his willingness to work with Trump, who removed the American troops from the country in his first term. So, a Trump win means differently to African leaders. Reactions have also come in from people across Africa who are rooting for a Trump victory.
Today, if Trump returns to the international stage with everything that is happening, and knowing that Trump is not pro-war, I believe this will rebalance exchanges and challenge Europe, which is also currently losing some momentum. So this will restore balance in international relations, which I think is a good thing.
I believe that if Trump is elected, he will have a significant geopolitical impact on what is happening in the world at the moment.
I think Trump is a good president for Americans. I believe in his wisdom.
But will Trump's presidency turn out to be better for Africa? Historically, Africa has stayed low in Washington's agenda. Both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump failed to make U.S.-Africa ties an election issue. Neither Trump nor the outgoing President Joe Biden visited Africa during their terms. Biden was slated to make his inaugural trip to Africa by visiting Angola in October. However, that trip was postponed to monitor response after powerful hurricanes battered southern United States. When Biden came to power, he sought to put Africa on a priority list. On paper, he had some great policies, but observers say that his Africa policy failed. The sentiment against the U.S.-led West is growing in Africa. U.S. troops have been kicked out of Niger, where Russia has gained ground, and U.S. support for permanent UNSC seats for African nations has also not materialized. But Trump's approach to Africa has also not been a cordial one. As a champion of protectionism, he rolled back some investments and proposed cutting aid to Africa in his first term. He also reportedly made some derogatory remarks for African nations. But it was not all bad. During his time in office from 2017 to 2021, Trump introduced the Prosper Africa initiative to support U.S. investors and the growing middle class across Africa to compete with China's Belt and Road Initiative. But going forward, his policies on some of the issues could define ties with Africa. In trade and investment, his stance on the pact, the African Growth and Opportunity Act, or the AGOA, is something to look out for. The pact has enabled eligible African countries to export some of their produce to the US without paying taxes since 2000. However, Trump said that the scheme would not be renewed when it expires in 2025. Then comes aid. Africa gets most of its aid from the US, but Trump had made proposals to slash foreign aid cuts, which were rejected by the Congress. But now that the Republicans have also won majority in the US Senate, where any further proposals would be blocked, and immigration has been Trump's main agenda. In his first term, Trump introduced measures that curbed immigration from several African countries, including Nigeria, Eritrea, Sudan, and Tanzania. Now moving over to security and conflict. While Trump has been away from the presidency, Africa has become a major geopolitical battleground. Russian troops have increased their presence. With Trump's America First policy, American intervention and presence in Africa could see a sharper decline. To discuss further on how another Trump presidency could impact Africa, we have with us Zemedene Negatu, a geopolitical commentator and international investor. He is joining us live from Addis Ababa. Thank you for being with us. Let's jump right in. How might Trump's second term affect economic and trade relations between the United States and African nations, considering the policies from his first administration?
Right. First of all, as always, thank you for having me. The answer to your question is the election of Mr. Trump to a second term in some ways can be measured to what he did in the first term, but also I expect some changes because he's been given a big mandate, so there might be certain things. But let me put things in context first. Africa in Washington has always been at the low end of priorities. And there are a number of reasons why. But so whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans, Africa seems not to be the priority. And one of the reasons is, for example, the U.S., its interest, its national interest is driven by its economic interest. So if you look at bilateral trade between the United States and Africa, it accounts for about only 1% of America's global trade. So there is a thinking that if it's economic engagement we want with Africa, if it's only 1%, do we want to make Africa a priority? I mean, that's one way of looking at it. So what I think will happen in his second term is perhaps, since he has gone through this difficulty with Africa in the first term, he might just change his views and say, even though Africa's trade with the U.S. is not as important as it is with China or other parts of the world, let's re-engage them, but engage from aid to investment. I think that's probably what he understands best, which is investment, doing business. And aid, even though the U.S. is a very generous country, if you look at the league tables of who gives aid to Africa, it still hasn't made that much of a difference to Africa. So he might change his track and go to the investment side, the trade emphasis side. So that might be one outcome of his re-election for a second term. So the other thing I wanted to emphasize is even the U.S.-Africa Summit, for example, which was reinitiated in 2022 by President Biden. Yes, it changed the tone of engagement, but I was on your program not too long ago. I said that the tone has changed, but substance hasn't. So you mentioned in your intro, for example, President Biden didn't visit Africa. President Trump didn't visit Africa. Okay, so do we see a lot of changes in that regard? The U.S.-Africa Summit continuing in the future, but with substance? I'm not so sure. There may be a different way of approaching it, maybe selectively certain countries, but wholesale engagement by the United States and all of Africa at the peak level, I don't see that happening.
Right. Let me jump in here. With African countries increasingly partnering with global powers like China and Russia, how might Trump's approach to foreign policy influence Africa's geopolitical landscape and its strategic alliances? We have seen Africa become a bit of a geopolitical battleground recently.
Right, and that's a very good point you're making. If you saw the recent BRICS summit that was held in Russia, there was a lot of discussion, there was a lot of talk about, the South-South cooperation, which essentially is designed or aspires to replace at best, but for sure create a counterbalance to the West influence as led by the United States. Now they're talking about de-dollarization, using a system different from SWIFT, but that also all is captured in the geopolitical angle. But specifically when it comes to Africa, as you know, 3 African countries are now members of the BRICS. South Africa, one of the original founders, Ethiopia and Egypt, who just joined this year. Okay, so that's why I was saying earlier, if the US is going to engage from a geopolitical angle, it will not be wholesale, all 54 countries, let's put every resources here and there. No, it will probably be selectively the more strategically important countries for the United States, whether it's South Africa, Nigeria, Ethiopia, perhaps Kenya and Egypt. These are going to be the
Right.
ones who play the geopolitical role and the attention that the US will give. And the other thing I wanted to emphasize is I expect
Right.
President Trump and his administration to disengage from promoting certain controversial issues in Africa. I mean, the cultural issues
Right.
that I think a lot of Africans did not accept. He may not also be promoting
Yeah.
issues like American style democracy or Western democracy to be implemented in Africa. I think he's going to definitely disengage from those, which I think the Democrats have been emphasizing for years
Right.
and decades. That definitely is going to be de-emphasized. So geopolitics, BRICS will play a big role, but the U.S. will counter that on a
Yeah.
selective basis. My emphasis, my expectation is American businesses would probably be encouraged to take the lead, supported by, for example, the United States
Yeah.
Development Financial Corporation, which, by the way, was created by Donald Trump during his first administration,
So,
as
Danae?
opposed to the U.S. government taking the lead on
Yeah.
aid or pouring in sovereign wealth, which it doesn't have. But that would be the kind of structuring
Right.
you should expect going forward.
Right. Thank you very much for being with us on Firstpost Africa and for your valued analysis there. We'll have to leave it there for now. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.